The Strait of Hormuz is silent tonight. No tankers, no cargo ships, no oil moving. Just warships, drones, and a suffocating tension that has gripped the entire global economy for weeks. 20% of the world's oil supply, frozen, held hostage by a single decision made inside one of the most secretive military organizations on the planet. But something has shifted, something no analyst predicted, something that, if confirmed, would mark one of the most extraordinary internal power struggles in the modern history of the Middle East. Because the question is no longer whether Iran will reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The question is, who inside Iran is trying to do it behind Khamenei's back? The world is watching the surface. But underneath, something far more dangerous is happening. For months, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has been the sword of the supreme leader, the instrument of his will, the force that closed Hormuz, seized tankers, and turned one of the most critical waterways on Earth into a geopolitical weapon. But right now, inside that very organization, a battle is being fought in silence. Commanders are talking. Back channels are active. And the whispers coming out of Tehran suggest that a significant faction inside the IRGC has decided that the closure of Hormuz is no longer in Iran's interest, not in the supreme leader's interest, in Iran's interest. That distinction may seem small, but in the Islamic Republic, it is the difference between loyalty and treason. What you are about to hear is not a rumor. This is a pattern. A series of events that, when placed side by side, reveals a picture that most Western governments are only now beginning to understand. And it starts not with a dramatic announcement, it starts with a disappearance. 3 weeks ago, a senior IRGC naval commander was quietly removed from his post at Bandar Abbas, the port city that sits directly at the choke point of Hormuz. No official statement, no press release, just gone. In most countries, that would be unremarkable. In Iran, where the IRGC controls not just the military, but the economy, the media, the political conversation, a sudden removal of a major naval figure is anything but routine. Sources inside the region began connecting dots. This commander had, for years, been considered a hardliner, a true believer in the doctrine of maximum pressure, the idea that Iran's greatest leverage over the West was its ability to strangle global energy at will. He had enforced the Hormuz closure with discipline and ruthlessness. So why was he removed? Because, according to multiple intelligence assessments now circulating in regional capitals, he had done something that the supreme leader could not tolerate. He had made contact, not with Americans, not with Israelis, but with Iranian economic officials and a quiet network of IRGC business figures who have been watching the Islamic Republic bleed out financially for months. Iran's economy is in a state of collapse that state media cannot fully hide anymore. The rial has lost catastrophic value. Fuel costs have spiked inside the country itself. The very oil Iran needs to fund its military, its proxies, its domestic stability, cannot be exported freely because of the same closure that was supposed to be Iran's weapon. The weapon is now pointed inward. And the IRGC commanders who built their financial empires on the back of Iran's energy sector are watching those empires erode in real time. Here's what most people do not realize. The IRGC is not just a military force, it is an economic empire. Construction, telecommunications, oil infrastructure, import networks. Billions of dollars in assets, all quietly tied to the same global energy markets that the Hormuz closure is now disrupting. When Khamenei ordered the strait closed, he believed the IRGC would execute the order without question. And publicly, they did. But privately, the calculus was already changing. This is where things take a serious turn. Because the faction that wants Hormuz reopened is not acting out of idealism, they are not suddenly friends of the West. They are not reformists or moderates in any traditional sense. They are pragmatists. Cold, calculating pragmatists who have looked at the numbers and reached a conclusion that contradicts the supreme leader's strategic vision. The conclusion is simple. Iran cannot sustain this. Every additional week that Hormuz remains closed accelerates internal economic deterioration. The sanctions pressure that already existed has now combined with self-imposed energy disruption to create a financial spiral that even the IRGC's considerable resources cannot buffer indefinitely. And there is something else. Something even more dangerous to Khamenei's position. The Iranian public is not rallying behind the closure. The initial surge of nationalist sentiment that Tehran expected, the wave of popular support that historically follows moments of confrontation with the West, it never came. Instead, fuel queues, price spikes, anger. The people who are suffering most from a closed Hormuz are not Americans or Europeans. They are Iranians. The IRGC commanders watching this on the ground understand what it means. They have seen what economic desperation does to regimes. They have helped suppress it before. And right now, they are calculating whether their loyalty to Khamenei is worth the cost of the instability that loyalty is producing. But what happened next changed everything. Somewhere in the second week of the internal standoff, a document was circulated. Not publicly, not through official channels. through the private networks that connect senior IRGC figures, revolutionary foundations, and the economic operators who run Iran's gray market energy trade. The document was not a manifesto. It was not a declaration of opposition to the supreme leader. It was something more subtle and more dangerous. It was a plan, a detailed operational framework for a phased reopening of Hormuz that would allow Iran to claim strategic victory while quietly stepping back from a position that was becoming untenable. It included language about sovereign navigation rights, international mediation, and a series of face-saving gestures that Tehran could present as concessions extracted from the West, rather than retreats forced by internal failure. In other words, it was a way out. And the fact that this plan existed, that it had been written, circulated, and received without immediate condemnation from the entire IRGC leadership structure, tells you everything you need to know about the depth of the fracture inside the Islamic Republic right now. The Supreme Leader's office became aware of the document's existence within days. The response was not a purge, not immediately. Instead, it was something that, in the language of authoritarian systems, is often more ominous than a purge. It was silence. Khamenei did not publicly address the internal dissent, did not issue a renewed order of absolute commitment to the closure, did not make an example of anyone in a visible way. He went quiet. And in Iran, when the Supreme Leader goes quiet on a strategic question, it usually means one of two things. Either he is preparing a devastating crackdown, or he is waiting, watching, measuring the weight of the coalition that has formed against his position before deciding whether that coalition is powerful enough to force a recalculation. The answer to which of those two things is happening may determine not just the fate of the Strait of Hormuz, but the future of the Islamic Republic itself. Here is the deeper reality that geopolitical analysts in Washington, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv are now grappling with. The IRGC has never, in the history of the Islamic Republic, openly defied the supreme leader on a strategic question of this magnitude. The organization was built to be Khamenei's most reliable instrument. Its commanders are ideologically vetted. Its loyalty is structural, not just personal, but structure bends under enough pressure. And the pressure that has accumulated around the Hormuz closure is unlike anything the IRGC has experienced since the Iran-Iraq War. That war forged the organization's identity. It created the mythology of sacrifice and resistance that still defines the IRGC's self-image. What is happening now is not a war. It is a slow suffocation. And unlike a war, where enemies are external and visible, suffocation produces a different kind of psychological pressure. It produces the need to find someone to blame internally. Right now, quietly, in the corridors of IRGC headquarters, the blame is being directed upward. There is a name that keeps appearing in the intelligence assessments, a name that Western analysts have flagged as potentially central to this entire situation. We will not name him. That would compromise the sources that have brought this picture into focus. But what can be said is that he is not a figure who has ever appeared on a Western sanctions list. He is not a public face of IRGC operations. He is a commander whose profile is deliberately kept low. And he is, by multiple accounts, the architect of the internal pressure campaign to reopen Hormuz. He is not a traitor to Iran. He believes, genuinely, that the closure is destroying the country he has spent his life serving. He sees the economic data that the public never sees. He understands the internal stability reports that never reach state media. And he has concluded that the supreme leader, at 85 years old, surrounded by yes-men and ideological hardliners, is making a catastrophic strategic error. What he is doing about that conclusion is what makes this story extraordinary. Because he is not staging a coup. He is not organizing a military takeover. He is doing something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous in a system like Iran's. He is building consensus, quietly, methodically, using the same networks of trust and obligation that the IRGC uses to run its business operations and its intelligence apparatus. He is having conversations, securing commitments, testing who will stand where if the moment comes when a choice must be made. And the picture that is emerging from those conversations is that the coalition in favor of reopening Hormuz is larger than Khamenei knows. It includes not just military figures, but clerical intermediaries, economic power brokers, and at least two figures who sit on bodies that formally answer directly to the supreme leader himself. This is not a rumor. This is the pattern that emerges when you trace the financial movements, the personnel changes, and the communication signals that have shifted over the past 6 weeks. Something is being built, carefully, behind the walls of one of the most surveilled power structures on Earth. And here is where the global stakes crystallize. Every day that Hormuz remains closed, the world economy absorbs another shock. Oil prices are not just elevated. They are volatile in a way that makes long-term planning impossible for governments, businesses, and individuals across dozens of countries. The countries most affected are not the wealthy ones. Europe can absorb price spikes. The Gulf states are, paradoxically, benefiting from elevated oil prices despite the disruption. The countries bleeding are in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. Countries that have no leverage in this geopolitical game and no cushion to absorb its consequences. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Kenya. Nations where fuel costs directly translate to food costs, transport costs, and the basic price of survival for hundreds of millions of people. The Hormuz closure is not just a geopolitical standoff. It is a humanitarian, slow-motion catastrophe being conducted at a remove so vast that most of its victims do not even know who is responsible. This is the context in which the internal IRGC faction is operating. Not just internal Iranian politics, not just a power struggle between old men in Tehran, but a decision whose consequences radiate outward to touch the lives of people who have never heard of the Strait of Hormuz and would not be able to point to it on a map. The next 72 hours, according to sources tracking this situation, are critical. There is a scheduled internal review within IRGC command structure. A meeting that, on paper, is about operational readiness and resource allocation. A meeting that, in reality, is about something else entirely. It is about whether the commanders who want Hormuz reopened will use that forum to force the question into the open, whether they will make their position undeniable in a way that requires a formal response from Khamenei, whether the internal dissent that has been building for weeks will finally break through the surface. And here's the detail that should hold your attention until the last second of this story. Khamenei's office has changed the security protocols around that meeting, not canceled it, not replaced the agenda, simply changed the security protocols, which means the Supreme Leader knows what is coming. He is not stopping it. He is watching it. That choice to watch rather than stop is itself a message. And decoding that message is the most important task facing every intelligence service, every energy ministry, and every government that depends on the free flow of oil through a strait 34 miles wide. The IRGC was built to be Khamenei's sword, absolute, loyal, lethal. But swords are objects. They do not have economies to protect. They do not watch their financial networks dissolve. They do not read internal stability reports that signal approaching social fracture. Men do. And the men of the IRGC, for all their ideology, for all their years of sworn loyalty, are watching the country they built their power inside begin to fracture under the weight of a decision they did not make but are being asked to enforce. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed tonight. The tankers are still waiting. The world's oil is still frozen. But inside the Islamic Republic, in a meeting room somewhere in Tehran that no satellite can image and no journalist can access, the men who hold the actual power over that strait are having a conversation. And when that conversation ends, the world will know very quickly which way it went. Because either the oil will start moving, or someone in Tehran will disappear, and in this story, both of those outcomes tell you everything.